Hello and welcome to episode 125 of Fergo and the Freak. I'm that bloke from Rugby League Project, Andrew Ferguson. You can find me on Twitter at AndrewRP. And join me as always is the glorious League Freak, who you can find on Twitter at League Freak. How you going there, mate?
I'm pretty good, Andrew. How are you doing?
Not bad. We're getting good at doing double takes on the intro.
Yeah, sometimes you've got to just perfect it, and we're perfecting things as we go.
Yeah, we took something perfect and then perfected it.
Exactly. We took perfection and just shined it up a little bit.
That's what we do here.
Mm.
You know, today you got to sit down and have a brief chat with a special guest. Tell us about it, mate.
Yeah, I got to talk to, I call him Rugby League Week Mole because he worked for Rugby League Week for so long. He works for Channel 9 now, obviously. One of the, he's probably got one of the biggest followings on Twitter for anybody in rugby league. And yeah, it was a real pleasure to talk to him. He's somebody that I know when we started the podcast, he was one of the first people that I kind of wanted to talk to. And yeah, it was fantastic to finally get a chance to have a chat with him.
That's right. And so I suppose we won't waste your time anymore. Sit back and check out League Freak chatting with the Mole.
All right. Thanks for joining us, Moley. First of all, it's been a pretty interesting off season because we had some really big news with Sonny Bill Williams coming back to rugby league on the biggest deal ever. But then it went really quiet apart from the Latrell Mitchell stuff. When does it start to ramp up for you and start getting busy when you start getting all of these leads and stuff?
Well, Freaky, to be honest, it's always busy in that, as you know, there's rumours flying left, right and centre. Today, for instance, there's a video of a league player and his girlfriend doing the rounds that everyone's talking about. I prefer to stick to the footy, and there's always stuff about players changing clubs. You know, the Latrell thing was kind of like a dominoes thing where if he went to a club, then someone else would go somewhere else. Similar with Jai Arrow, like Souths are desperate to get him. That's an ongoing saga. The Titans won't let him go unless they get a player in return. So there's always stuff going on. And the question I get asked more than any other is a very simple one. It's, who is my club going to sign for this season? So that's what the fans want to know. And the hard part is separating fact from fiction.
Yeah, and that's something you've done it for years and years now. You've been really good at getting really good mail on who's going where and what's going on in the game. And, that's why everybody knows you. What is it like, though, when you get told by, say, a club or a player or a manager that this is happening and you go to print with it and then they change their mind? That's got to be frustrating because, it happens. It's happened to me as well.
Yeah, it is. It's scary, and because your reputation can take an absolute battering. It's easier now in these days of social media, I've got to say. 5 years ago, I was working for Rugby League Week, which we know is no longer with us. We'd put that to bed on a Monday and it'd come out on a Thursday. So as you can imagine, so much can change in those 3 days, let alone a few hours. And that's the thing. Fans just don't seem to understand. A story can be right at 10 o'clock in the morning. As an example, Latrell could have been going to the Tigers. Then South's come in with a better offer, and he's going to South. So things change. It's like any business negotiation. There's constant changing of minds, constant shifting, and it's just another dynamic that makes it very difficult. And you got to be careful because if things change and you theoretically get it wrong, you get absolutely smashed by the keyboard warriors.
Yeah, I've seen you actually get hammered when a player has signed with a club that you've said they were going to sign with, but it didn't happen in the few days you said it was going to. It happened a couple of days later. It's very strange to me, but anyway.
And with this, the world of social media these days, in the last 12 months, I've had 2 or 3 players come back and say, put absolute crap on my story saying, Moley, where do you make this rubbish up? And next thing, the story comes true, and then I think players have just got to be smarter, because in the end, they look good for a day or so and I get smashed by the fans, but in the end they look very silly and their credibility is shot. And I call them on it. I say, you've lied to your own fans. It's a pretty low act, but again, this is the world we live in now.
Yeah, and it's weird because I think that it's not needed either. Like, I think that a player wouldn't lose anything if they said, yeah, look, I'm not real sure just yet, or I'm still weighing it up. And yeah, I mean, I've seen a couple of those instances where they've absolutely hammered you and everyone jumps on board, of course. But, I mean, you end up being proven right. That's why you've had such a long and great career. So, yeah, when something like that happens, do you work out who you can talk to in the game and they do give you good mail, and who basically they'll talk to you, but you just don't go to print with it or don't put it out there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of wannabe journalists, a lot of wannabe newsbreakers out there, and a lot of people who contact me and say, hey, Moley, Latrell's going here, Latrell's going there, and I just use Latrell as an example because he's been the biggest story in the last few weeks, as you pointed out, and it's very different, and sometimes it's almost trial and error. Sometimes you think, well, this guy seems to know what he's talking about. I'll run with it, and sometimes you do get burned. I mean, I've got stories wrong. It's something that all journos have from time to time, and you've got to live with it when it happens. You've just got to ride out the storm and wait for the next story, sort of thing.
On the other end of the scale, you tend to have, it seems like through social media anyway, and the banter that we see with some players, really good relationships with some players as well. I mean, that must be nice for a journalist, because I know that there's very much a standoffish sort of feeling amongst a lot of people in the game to journalists. But it seems like you have cultivated a lot of trust with a lot of people, and you've got good relationships with some players.
Yeah, that's right. And there are some players out there who are great. By and large, I'm convinced that clubs don't like that. They want to keep players and journos as far apart as possible. But it's good to see, and it's usually some of the more seasoned veteran players who can think for themselves, who aren't afraid to go on social media and say, hey, g'day, Moley, how's things? Or thanks for the rap, that sort of thing. And yeah, I think it definitely adds to your credibility. That's for sure.
One of the things I wanted to get some of your opinions on things that were happening in the game, because as we were saying just earlier, you don't get to give your opinions on too many issues within the game. Otherwise, you'll get absolutely smashed. And people say, well, you're supposed to be a journalist, you're supposed to be objective. And it's like, you just want to talk about footy like the rest of us do. So just a couple of subjects. Do you think that, and this is once again with the Latrell Mitchell thing, which I thought this was a weird argument, but do you think the salary cap is working in the NRL the way it was intended? And do you think that we're getting the right outcome for the game anyway, even if the salary cap there's maybe little ways around it, which I don't think there's that many ways around it these days, to be honest. But do you think it's working overall?
Well, Freaker, I've got to tell you, I'm convinced, and I've had evidence, stuff that I can't print because I'd get sued. People have to understand libel laws and what you can say and what you can't say. But there are quite a few clubs that cheat the cap. They do it in some ways that are out and out shady, some ways that are grey areas, but the cap is a bit of a standing joke among clubs and player managers who find ways around it. And the one thing that I can point out that does make it less fair, particularly to the battling clubs, the likes of the Titans and the Tigers, is the third-party agreements, which the struggling clubs really have problems with, whereas the rich clubs can offer players. And obviously, if a player's talking to a club that can offer him TPAs and a club that's not, it's not hard to see which club he'll go to. Now, that's legal, but it's a bit of a flaw in the cap in that it just makes it harder for the poorer clubs, and we can see the gulf between the rich clubs and the poor clubs is getting bigger, and that's something that is not good for the game.
Do you think that some of that, though, comes down to how well the club, like just whatever club it is, that they're run? Like the better clubs tend to be able to attract these third-party agreements for players, whereas you get a club that might not be run as well, and they just don't have that ability to attract that extra money into their player base, basically.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it, but a lot of it comes down to how big the club is. The one-team towns obviously have an advantage. I mean, you look at the Broncos; they're very powerful. A lot of the Sydney clubs struggle because, as you know, it's basically one market, and there's 8 or 9 clubs all fighting for basically the same corporate dollars. But you're right in the sense you look at the Roosters and how well they're run. They attract far more corporate sponsorship than most most clubs in the game, I'd venture to say. And, of course, it's no coincidence they're back-to-back premiers. So, yeah, I mean, Jack Gibson, the legendary coach, used to say that, you've got to be strong at the top. And I guess that is basically what you're saying there.
Yeah, 100%. Is there something within the rugby league season that's rugby league related that you look forward to every year, like State of Origin time or just finals time in general? Is there something that's your thing that you love about the rugby league season?
Well, Freaky, this will probably get me offside with a few people, but I am not a huge fan of Origin in that.
Oh, really?
I think we've got a great competition, goes for 26 rounds, but for almost a third of the season, we've got split rounds, we've got games that should be great games with players sitting out, all for the sake of 3 matches. I would like to think that there's a better way of doing it. Having said that, what I do like, I mean, I love the games. I just love the week to week, the combat, and I guess I love the fairy tale stories, the underdogs getting up, games that teams have no right to win, which they just guts it out and beat better teams, and that seems to still be happening, even though, as we said a minute ago, there's a big gulf between the rich and the poor clubs, and there's nothing better than seeing a battling club get over the top of a supposed super club.
Yeah, I always find the times when you're proven wrong, when you go into a game and you think, oh, this is going to be a walkover, and you're proven wrong, and there's nothing you can put your finger on other than they just wanted it more. I find that that's something special that rugby league has that a lot of other sports would love to have.
Yeah, that's right. And you can sometimes you can just smell it in the first 5 minutes. You think, as you said, this is going to be a walk in the park. But all of a sudden, in that first 5 minutes, the team that's not supposed to win is just coming out and belting blokes and competing harder for the football and maybe getting the bounce of the ball go their way, and you can see an upset brewing, and it doesn't always happen, of course. There's plenty of times where the underdog's leading at the 60th minute and the good team comes home and wins with a wet sail. But I mean, that's a great contest too. You can't ask for more than that. A game that goes down to the wire, and haven't we seen a lot of those in the last few years? So I think the product itself is great. There's a lot wrong with rugby league. We could talk about referees all day. We could talk about the bunker all day and the salary cap. But at the end of the day, it's a great product. The players are amazing athletes. They're doing things that players, 20, 30 years ago could only have dreamt about. Just some of those dives for tries we see as an example. And, it's one thing we can't complain about. The game itself is great. I think that's why the fans keep coming back.
So you like their current, because I'm a big fan of the way the balance in rugby league right now on the field, the current style of football. I just think they should not touch the rules at all and just leave it. I love it. Do you feel the same way, or is there something from the past you would like to bring back? Like, I mean, I hear people saying we should bring back the 5 metre rule. I think they're crazy. But is there something that, like, do you just like the balance that we've got right now, or do you think that there's anything that should be changed?
Yeah, if anything, I'd just like to quicken things up a bit. The scrums to me, I mean, contested scrums, we can never go back to that. But every time there's a scrum, I know there's a shot clock for it, but it just seems to take forever. You look at the old games from the 70s, and players would run 30 metres to a scrum, and it'd be down in 5 seconds. It seems these days we almost have a tea party. I'd like to see. I think the shot clock for the scrum is 30 seconds. I'd like to see it reduced to 20 because the momentum seems to go out of the game. You know, players go down injured, players have a drink, players have a chat, and you know we're talking the average game probably has 10, 15 scrums, so it's just totally halts the momentum. So I think it's something the NRL could look at and very easily fix, and it'd just quicken things up, and the fans would be happier.
Now, just a couple more questions. Who do you think's going to win it this year? Like, a lot of people are going to say the Roosters, but I think they've lost a lot of talent this off-season, and I think people are going to overlook that. But is there somebody else that you think that maybe is set up for this year and is starting to look good?
Well, Freaky, without blowing my own trumpet, I tipped the Roosters 2 years ago. I tipped them last year, and I'm tipping again. I've got huge respect for Trent Robinson. Sure, Cooper Cronk's going to be a big loss. Latrell's going to be a loss. But they've just got plenty of depth. They've got all the players in the right positions. I think Luke Keary will step up with Cronk gone. Their forwards are just awesome. You know, they've got players in all the best positions, and probably the best fullback in the game in Tedesco, and fullback is such a key position in the modern game. So it'll be tough for them this year. You're right, but I just think they've got everything in place. They're a strong organisation. They're smart. Nick Politis runs a very tight ship. So for me, it's 3 in a row, and of course that hasn't happened since the days of Parramatta in the early 1980s.
Yeah, that would, if they can win 3 in a row, especially in this sort of NRL salary cap era, that you start putting them in the category of like where are they in the greatest teams of all time as well? Because getting 3 in a row, it's unbelievable in this day and age. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's right. Well, even 2 in a row. I mean, it's been over 20 years since that happened. So it shows just how competitive things are, and some people say it's a good thing that we have a different premier every year, and I can agree with that. But also if a team gets a bit of a dynasty going, you look at the St George team that won 11 straight premierships, you'd think that would have got boring, but league was never stronger. I mean, I see old footage of those games, and in the pouring rain with a lot of grounds having no grandstands, the grounds were full. So, I think a team gets a bit of an aura to it, and that Roosters team is getting it now, and every team wants to knock them off, and, it's a massive weekly challenge, and it's going to create plenty of interesting games over the next, 7-8 months, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I agree 100%. You kind of need that standard to aim for and need to overcome. I think the Storm had that for a little while too. It turned out that they were smashing the cap, but they still had it. So last couple of questions I've got for you. Is there one story in your career that you would put forward and say, that's my best work, or that is something I was really proud of, that moment there?
Mm-hmm. But it's a bit of a left field one, and it happened at Rugby League Week probably 10 or so years ago with just a battling front rower called Ray Cashmere, who was playing lower grades for the Dragons. The Dragons had no plans to use him. Tim Sheens, who's a good mate of mine, wanted to get him to the Tigers. I started a campaign in League Week, Free Ray Cashmere, and after a couple of weeks, the Dragons, through the pressure that created, relented, and he went on to play like 2 seasons of first grade at the Tigers. And I don't know why, but I just feel like, that story achieved something.
Yeah.
The Dragons did the right thing, and it enabled a battling, really no-name player to finish his career in first grade. And I just got a lot of satisfaction out of that one.
That's amazing. That's cool. There's something about those players, they're not fringe first graders, but just the honest to goodness first grader that doesn't get headlines. Like, I would love to talk to a bunch of them because I think that they've got the interesting stories. The superstars, they turn up, they're going to play every week if they want, but it's them guys that have to really bust their ass every week, and that their job could be taken by an 18-year-old that has a good couple of weeks in the lower grades. I always find that those players are the really interesting stories in rugby league.
Yeah, that's right, and it's so competitive, as you say. I mean, you miss a week, a young kid comes in and does well, and you could be sitting the next 10 weeks in reserve grade, and that's why a lot of guys play wounded, because they're terrified of losing their spots, and you kind of feel for them. As you say, the superstars, they've got it all laid out on a plate for them, and if they have a bad game, they'll cop a bit of criticism, but they know they're going to be there next week. But as you say, the battlers, they've got to produce every week or they're out, and there's a hell of a lot more battlers in the game than superstars. So yeah, it's another angle of the game that is so intriguing every week to see these guys try to match it with the superstars.
Now, you had a podcast last year. We're going to see on that podcast again this year?
Yeah, we're looking for a sponsor. So if you know anyone out there with a bit of pull, it was getting good numbers. I did it with my mate Matt Cleary, another veteran journo, and the feedback was good. We were getting plenty of listeners. So, any sponsors out there want to get behind the podcast, drop me a line.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking your time. Everyone, follow Moley on Twitter. He's very easy to find. You've got so many followers. It's absolutely incredible. I remember when you pretty much joined it. It's great. So, thanks for joining us, and, have a great season, and look forward to reading your work during the year. It
was my pleasure, Freaky, and you have a good one too.
Thank you.
Well, there we go. That was a bloody good chat there, mate.
Yeah, it was a pretty good interview. It was short and sharp and fantastic. I was really interested to hear his points of view on the salary cap, because I tend to think that it works all right, but he said that, he's seen for himself that, there's some issues with it. I thought that was really interesting. But, yeah, he seems like a really great bloke to talk to. I'd like to get him on again in the future and, just ask him his opinions about stuff rather than focusing on the things that he's had to report in his job. I always think that it's, he's been around the game for a long time, and there wouldn't be too many times that people would really get a chance to ask him what he thinks about the game. So I tried to do that a little bit rather than asking the same old questions. So I hope everyone enjoyed it, and I want to thank Moley for coming on. He was fantastic with his time.
Yeah, no, he did well. I suppose on the salary cap thing, I'm kind of the same. I think it's the game is better for it than if it wasn't around. Mm-hmm. And I know I said on another recent episode, and that was, you think if you're a club other than one of the big few financially, would your team be better off if there was no salary cap? And the answer is always going to be no.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there can be tweaks to it, but I think it's better that it exists than if it didn't.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. And We've had times in the game's history where it hasn't existed. We've had times where teams have absolutely smashed the salary cap and it's really stood out. So there's a lot of discussion in Super League right now about their salary cap. And we actually saw in rugby union in England where one team absolutely annihilated the salary cap and they're relegating them because of that. It was Saracens. So, there's a lot of angst about salary cap, but I think in the NRL, look, it does the job we kind of need it to do. It gives you an even-ish competition. It helps with talent equalisation. It's not perfect, but I think it does kind of what we need it to.
Yeah, I think the only tweaking would be with the third-party arrangements. That's probably about it. I think the mechanics of the salary cap itself are pretty damn solid.
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much. And I mean, look, if they're all getting around it by a little bit, then, as long as they're in the same ballpark, really. And we've said this before, the teams that are towards the bottom of the ladder tend to be the teams that are poorly run. So, and once those teams get their act together, they can go up the ladder pretty quickly. They can turn things around quickly. And that's a function of the salary cap in itself.
That's right. I mean, the Roosters are a prime example of it. You look at where they were throughout the mid to late 80s and early 90s.
Yeah, they were nowhere. They were a nothing club for a long, long time. And, they've turned it around. I look at teams some of the teams that have won premierships and wooden spoons in the last 20 years, that shows that the salary cap on some level works.
Exactly. So, yeah, I'm fine with it. What else did you talk about that you wanted to have a quick yarn about?
That was the main one that stood out. I think that the other thing was, the thing I like about Moley is, and he talked about it just briefly, he focuses on the footy stuff. He doesn't get into some of the off-field stuff that you see other news organisations and other media types really get into, and that's one of the things I like about him. We give journalists on here a lot of grief. I think Moley's one of the good ones, and there's not many of them that I'd say that about, but I do. I think he's one of the good ones, and that's why it was so nice to talk to him. And he just seemed like a really nice bloke. I guess that's the main thing.
Yeah, I've known him for a while. He is definitely a good bloke. I think in the past he may have dabbled only occasionally in some of the smutty stories, but only after they'd already been broken.
Yeah.
And it was like providing updates, but it doesn't tend to be something that he's interested in spending much time in.
Yeah. Look, and some of the things you kind of do have to address because they're out there, and that's his job too. The other thing that was interesting talking to him about was when I said about when players or managers or whatever, they change their mind. And I said that it must be annoying. And he said it's scary. And it was because he basically trades on his word. If everything he says is wrong, then, he's nowhere. And that's why he's been so successful, because his strike rate is amazing. And, he gets stories out there that people don't even know are stories. And when he described it as scary, I thought that was really interesting, because it showed how important it was to him and what it meant to him.
Yeah. The one thing that stood out for me is I wish Tim Sheens had have chased someone other than Ray Cashmere. And no slur on Ray Cashmere. He was a solid toiler for the club, but, we could have done with someone, Darren Lockyer. Free Lockyer. Yeah. Yeah. That would have been handy. See, that's a slight on Tim Sheens and no one else.
See, this is an idea, right? What if, we befriend the Moley, right? And then we ask him, can you just do a free, I don't know, who would you, who would be a cool player to get into your team?
Taumalolo.
Yeah, free Taumalolo. The Panthers need him really badly. He's just, that contract, it's too long.
Do you reckon he would work his magic still?
Oh yeah, yeah. He's still got it. He's still got the magic touch for sure.
Uh-huh.
He could make it happen.
That'd be the way to go.
Yeah.
No, that was a damn good chat, mate. Good job there.
Thank you.
I'm glad to have helped out.
Yeah, look, I couldn't have done it with you. Yeah, it's funny because it's always weird when I do a podcast with you. Yeah, I've only done one before, and but with this one, I knew that we'd kind of do it in this format. We haven't done it in this format before, where we've done an intro and an outro to an interview. And yeah, so it's cool to be able to do that and talk to you about the interview.
Yeah, and especially it shows that we're also editing masters.
We really are. We've got production background now between the two of us.
This is going to be very handy skills to have when we go through all of those deleted episodes and we start piecing crap together.
Yeah. I do plan on doing that. We've got some that I believe there is content in there that we can cut out and put out there without any, legal issues.
I've gone through the entire episode with Nadine.
Yeah.
And I believe there's 7 words in there that we can use.
Yeah.
They're not all together in one sentence, but we'll see what we can do.
Yeah,
we'll take some major surgery on that one.
We might have to chop it up into bits. I listened to the one that we did with Carsten Brummer.
Oh, yes, that had less words we could use.
Yeah. It was, man, they're 2 great episodes. I really wish we could put them out in full, but we just cannot.
No. Unless you want to give us a lot of money and listen to it privately.
Yeah, how much money would you... Just say we started selling those episodes. How much would you have to sell them for?
Let's start it with at least 20K each.
Yeah, it's got to be enough that you can say, listen, this has to support me through some difficult times that are coming up.
Yes. And if you make it public, you've got to also pay our legal costs.
Yeah.
We're going to cover our asses from our side of breakfast time on this one.
Yeah. Oh, man.
All right. Well, thanks again for everyone to tune in on this interesting episode. And thanks, Moley, again for being a guest. Mm-hmm. You can check us out on Twitter at FergoFreakPod. You can drop us a line via email at
podcast@leaguefreak.com.
That's the one. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn. God knows, everywhere. Get in there, like us, follow us, support us, whatever you got to do.
And tell your friends. Just say to your friends, listen, I've been listening to this podcast. It's bloody amazing. You should check it out. And yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, leave us some feedback on your podcast provider.
Yeah, good reviews we'll always read out.
Absolutely. And you can either just take a screenshot of it and send it to, tag it to the podcast account or to Freaky or myself. Mm-hmm. We'll read it out on the next show.
Yeah, 100%. We love it.
Bloody oath we do. We thrive on feedback.
Yeah, it's great.
Jeez. And I suppose on that note, we'll wrap this sucker up, eh?
Yeah.
Alrighty. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll catch you next time.